Hello and welcome to another late night talk. My guest this evening is Jenny Hannaford. Hello, good evening.
Good
How,
evening. Nice
how
to
are
see you.
you? How,
I'm good, thank you.
last time I saw you was FantasyCon last year, I think, in Birmingham.
I think it probably was. Yeah, I think it was at Birmingham. I was trying to work out when I'd last seen you, and I reckon it was there.
Mm.
Probably as I was coming in and out of the Cayley.
More than likely, yes, yes. So, as I like to do, I like to go back to the beginning and talk about where your love of writing and reading came from. So, what were some of your early inspirations? What were you reading as a child?
Oh, my parents had this kind of library downstairs, and it was just I always wanted to read everything in it. I
Mhm.
was the kind of kid who would read the back of milk bottles and packets, and if I was sitting at the table, I wasn't paying attention because I was reading anything that was in front of me. So And I always enjoyed a little bit of fantasy, but I went through lots of horse books briefly as a
Okay.
child, was very into horses, so I went through a few of those.
Mhm.
But like I suppose almost stereotypical in some respects, I read Alice in Wonderland at about 8,
Mhm.
and I'd read Lord of the Rings by 10. Um, I remember trying Silmarillion, and I remember
Yeah,
having to put it down and come back to it a couple of years later.
same.
But I did finish. But it was that kind of like I'm not ready for this yet. This is a bit. I remember feeling it was a bit like the Bible at the time. It was
Mhm.
very kind of that sort of language that I'd seen and thinking, oh, okay. So um I've read all of those, and I still have some of the earlier books that I've got. I read Redwall. I loved all of those sorts of animal based fantasy. But I also read science books. So even from that age, I'd read the science books on the shelves and
Interesting.
anything like that that had either knowledge I wanted or things that would just kind of blow my mind. And yeah, so, and I always wanted to read dad's books. Mum's always seemed, she'd be horrified me saying hers didn't seem very exciting. Hers were I mean, there were lots of meaningful books.
Right.
Um, but dad's always looked the fun ones. So I've definitely got him to kind of thank, I suppose, for getting me into the fantasy side of things. And yeah, I was almost never without a book in my hand. When things got hard, I'd go read a book.
Mhm.
Um, and I'd just vanish into my room for the rest of the day with whatever the chunkiest novel I'd got in hand at the time was. So yeah, that's kind of where I started. I very much enjoyed. I mean, I went through a lot of the typicals. I've got read all of the Wheel of Time. Um,
Okay.
I I do remember I've got one on hand here. This was probably is that book one? This was probably the first what I would say modern fantasy, maybe. I know it's not modern now, but it was when it came
Oh,
out. The
okay. No, they
Melanie
were.
Rawn,
Hmm.
and I bought that. That might even be that's a UK version. Half my series is Canadian
Oh,
because I
okay.
picked them up in an airport, and then I just kept going. So I've got the full set of those. I've got the Robin Hobbs, who was a much bigger influence on me, I think, than I realized until much later.
Why'd you say
So,
that?
well, because I read, and I've got the first Assassins trilogy
Hmm.
here, and I must have read it as I read it as a teenager, I think. I mean, the covers I've got on them are quite old. They're very faded. They're and that's the Farsi. So they're quite an older
Old
cover.
ones. Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I had those as I when I got them, and I'd kind of forgotten I'd read them, if I'm honest. They'd just gone into my big bank of books in my brain. And I wrote Gates of Hope. Um, it was the first book I wrote, and I guess I wasn't as adventurous as I am now in many respects. So although it's the more recent series, it was the first series I wrote. And I remember then going back to that series just because I kept hearing everyone talk about them. I wanted to remind myself. And there, front and center was Night Eyes. And I was like, oh, oh. I had this panic, as I said to a friend we were talking about it the other day. I had this panic that people would go, oh my gosh, this is just Robin Hobb fanfic. with a bit of something else thrown in. And it's like, no, there just happens to be a telepathic dog. It's fine. There are other telepathic dogs in fantasy.
Yes,
But
this is true. It's true. Yes. I was reading Wendy and Kuntz books, so yes, they didn't copy them from each other, so that's fine.
yeah, I went through a James Herbert phase as well. Definitely went through a James Herbert phase.
Mm. So when did your love of reading become a love of writing? Were you always writing your own stories when you were young?
I think it was tricky because I wrote my own stuff, I think, when I was very little. I remember being very proud of an entire story about a family of vegetables in a pea garden. That mum still has, that I remember it was 7 pages long and we located it,
Wow.
and it is 7 pages long. It's about 3 lines on each page, but it was 7 pages long when I was about 4 or 5.
Nice.
And so I remember writing quite a lot then. And in primary school, my teacher had this way of teaching. Of history was always through a time machine. So you'd get in the time machine and then you'd have to go and write about the period that whatever it was. And myself and a boy in the class were always the two that wrote 3, 4, 5 pages of A4 while everyone else was kind of finishing a page. So I clearly always enjoyed telling stories, but then when I got into secondary school, it was a bit more that was my escape still, and I went down far more the sciences route. So although I wrote occasional bits of poetry for friends and was very proud of a piece that my English teacher put up on the wall of his office about animal cruelty, I seem to remember, it was never something that I kind of was current. It was something that was always there as a bit of an undercurrent, and I'd still liked escaping. So I went very around the houses. I kind of always thought maybe I'd like to write a book, but I didn't really know where to start. And then I got into, I had a friend who played EverQuest.
I played that.
So I was
First ever.
guild leader on Antonius Bale. We had quite a big guild in the end. But it was a role play server, and suddenly I could live in these worlds. So it was like going from, I can see the nod, it's like going from reading about them to being in them. I mean, the graphics weren't like they are now, but it was still, oh my goodness, I'm wandering around doing quests. I'm doing quests, not the characters in the book, and the whole wow. And I can go for as long and as I played way too long and way too much, and I played for quite a long time. I would get home from work and I would log on just to be in this fantasy world, and I'm not even going to tell you what time I logged off, and then drove to work the next morning. And so it kind of went through there, and then I started writing, I suppose it's fanfic of the characters that I was playing.
Okay, interesting.
And I think that archive is somewhere out on the internet, and no, I'm not sharing the handle, although actually it is public, but never mind. It wouldn't take too much digging to find it, and it's awful. So, but about the characters in our guild and things like that. And then I thought, okay, maybe I can do this again, and maybe I can write again. So it kind of went full round the houses of reading it, being it, wanting to create my own worlds.
Yeah. For those who have no idea what we're talking about, EverQuest was the first MMORPG on the internet ever, as far as I know, fantasy-based one.
I think so, yeah.
And it was very, very basic. It was, go out and kill 10 rats, and then you'll get a little bit of something. Then go out and collect 10 rocks and come back. And there's a lot of grinding in those early games.
Oh my gosh, so much grinding. And the big boss battles at the end, when you got to that point and you had 100 people and you were dying and being resurrected and dying and being resurrected, and it's like a mob fight in Baldur's Gate where it all goes wrong. But you had everybody in the lag, and you had no idea if the monster was dead or not because the lag was so bad, because so many of you were simultaneously casting stuff at the same time.
And there was no voice chat. It was all text-based. There was no
everything
mics. There was no nothing. So you're just constantly typing into your party chat all the time. /P.
And I two-boxed as well. So I was running 2 machines at the same time with macros typed in to make the second character run around after me.
Yep, I'd ring my friend and say, right, we're logging on at this time, and then we'd go and log on and meet at a certain place, and then we'd start doing parties.
I mean,
Yeah.
it got me some. It literally changed my life in more ways than one. I went out to visit friends that I'd met online out
Mhm.
in the States
Oh,
for a little bit.
wow.
Um, because of a friendship that became a relationship I ended up in the town I now live in,
That's an interesting
which when
twist.
that went to pieces, a long while before I met my husband, I was still here because I had a good job.
Hmm.
So literally
Wow.
the game changed everything. The friends I made in there. And I still would say that a lot of the friends I have online are potentially closer than a lot of friends I have in real life, with obviously some exceptions.
Mm.
But a lot of the friends that I meet through online communities are as much genuine friends to me because I suppose that's what I came up through with EverQuest and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. We started in EverQuest, and then it was things like Knights of the Old Republic,
I went to
and
EQ too.
I never went to EQ2. I did Knights, I did about five different things. Eventually, of course, WoW came along, and I went to World of Warcraft from the
Oh,
very
brilliant.
basic days. Yeah. Well, I've been clean for a number of years now, but I was on
Yeah.
WoW for a long time. A long time.
Yeah, I tried Rift. I was I remember sitting facing the other way to where I am here
Mm.
and trying to play Rift. And my old machine that was an absolute top of the range machine at the time I bought it. Sorry. It just couldn't keep up with the new graphics.
Wow.
So Baldur's Gate is literally the first game I've played probably in 9 years
Oh, wow.
of
Okay.
any sort of game. And I got
Proper
talked into it
break.
by my yeah, proper break. I got talked into it by my D&D group
Hmm.
who wouldn't stop talking about how epic it was.
So you
So
were playing D&D with paper and dice and all the rest of it
no,
in parallel, or
no,
what?
we were playing no, we were playing. I've been playing online for a few years, as in through
Yes.
Discord.
Hmm.
But yes, so still, but that's after the writing. That's kind of
That's
I've
come
done a lot of this
later.
backwards. That's come
It,
later.
it does seem like you've gone from one thing and then gone back to games and come back to D&D. Yeah. I was doing all
Yeah,
of it at one time or another all the way through. So yeah. And now it's progressed that I am doing more of it online than ever
yeah.
before, which we couldn't do before either because we didn't have the
It's quite
technology.
nice because you get to play with people that you wouldn't necessarily have the option of. I'm very lucky with the friends that get to play with, and we still, I don't think, have all been in one place at the same time yet. We've
No,
had 3 or 4 of us at one time, but not all of us.
same. We have people in all across the world that we play with. It's fantastic. It's just finding a time zone that we can all do now. It's a tricky
And
thing.
that's even harder. We're all UK, so
And yeah, yeah, we've got Canada, Europe, UK, and America. So yeah, it's fun finding a good
yeah.
moment in time. But anyway, so when did you attempt to write your first novel, and what was the impetus to go, I've got this idea that won't leave me alone, or I want to write something.
Mm. So the first one I wrote is obviously, I've said it before, is Gates of Hope.
Hmm.
So that was the first one I wrote, and it took me a long time. I was part-time. I had my son at home. I felt like maybe if I had time to do it, this was the time I had to potentially do it while he was napping, while he was doing stuff. So it took a long time when I first started. And the original idea of Gates of Hope was to write a book as a thank you to my dad. So Gates of Hope, that's why it's dedicated to him and my nan. But it was as a kind of thank you. I wanted to write a story to kind of give to him
Hmm.
for him to read, and he was the first person who read it.
Oh, that's nice.
So he, bless him, read the not particularly great version that I sent out to agents because I was really proud of it at the time, and I never should have done that. But anyway, um, yeah. So that was the one, that was the first one, and I overwrote it, and there was too much words and the world building. I've still got the original map I drew.
Hmm.
It's behind me on the shelf. Um, and yeah, and it probably took me 5 years to write it
Yeah.
because I realized I'd made this incredibly complicated world. And it's the first one, isn't it? Sometimes finishing that first one is the big thing. And I remember I'd finished it about 2 weeks before Bristol Con in 1990. No, not 1990. That would make me really, really daft. In 2019.
Right. Okay.
And I know that because I wanted to go to my first Bristol Con with my book having already been submitted to agents. It was a real thing that I wanted to have it done. I wanted to feel like I could do that. And obviously it was overwritten. It was nowhere near ready.
Do you know how
and
long
it
it
got rejected
was?
out of hand. The original book.
Yeah.
The original book ended up being the same length as the final book.
Oh.
So it would have been about 114. No, actually, the original was 114,000, and the final is 150. When I say
Okay.
overwritten, there were too many words in every sentence.
Right. Okay. I thought you meant okay.
Overwrought and overwritten.
Right. I thought you
Every
meant it was just like
no,
500,000 words going, yeah, this is the one.
no, it was unreadable almost. And Justin Lee Anderson very, very kindly crucified it for me. So he took it after that Bristol Con. He read it. He got 2 chapters in and he said, I think we need to talk.
Oh, okay. That's never good for
And
sure.
I remember him saying this, and he knows, and I'm very, very, I said, how many bottles of whiskey do I need on hand? And he said, 1 should be enough. But he said that my world building was brilliant. He could see that I had all the makings necessary, but I needed to learn to write.
Right. Okay.
And then we spent several a month, 2 months, where he basically coached me until I had tweaked and understood what he meant. He gave me a lot of hints and tips that I still use now. And yeah, so and after that, I kind of fought through it and I worked through the book, and it was still too fresh. And the skin was screaming at me by then.
Right. So you submitted it, you said, and it had been turned down by agents, but
it was turned down by agents, and then I'm going to have to cough this one. I'm sorry.
go ahead.
So, yeah, so it got roundly turned down.
Okay.
And that's fine. It wasn't ready. But by that point, there'd been an incident involving a certain Steve McHugh talking about Selkies and how rubbish they are on a panel about mythical creatures, and how generally the panel as a whole had agreed that Selkies were the worst fantasy creatures in existence. And I'd already written a short story about them at this point. And the character from the short story, which it might have been removed now because I did ask them to remove it, was on Fantasy Faction. In one of their kind of writing workshop pages that I was using to try and they put a picture up and then you try and come up with a story within a month.
Yeah.
And they'd voted it really highly. So I was quite proud of this Selkie and the character in it. And whilst I was sitting there, this voice, you get that character in your head, and this would not go away. So Gates got shelved.
Right. Okay.
I was like, I'm clearly not ready to finish this. And the skin was, as opposed to 5 years to write Gates, the skin was written within 4 months.
Oh, wow. That's a dramatic shift.
Yeah, so first draft was done in 4 months. And the Pact the year after was again, which is why the two of them came out less than a year apart.
Mm-hmm. Did you plan them, or were they was the skin just kind of whole cloth in your head and it just came out that quickly?
I had this kind of a little bit of an idea, and I ran it past a couple of friends. And I was a bit conscious because the idea that was growing was I really love Ash, A Secret History by Mary Gentle.
Right.
And I absolutely love the way the two timelines intersect.
Mm-hmm.
And that had always been something that I thought was incredibly clever. And I loved the idea that you got to the end of the book and you were like, oh my God, I need to go back to the beginning and read that again. Because now things make sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I wanted to do that. And I think they all thought I was a bit mad because I was trying to do something like that as a first book that I was going to put out,
Mm-hmm.
which is a bit of a risky move. And I was aware at the time it was risky, and I was aware it might not be palatable to people, and that it might appear that it was completely full of continuity errors and all sorts of stuff like that. So I knew I was taking a massive risk with it.
Mm.
But yeah, once I started, it was kind of tricky to work it. And I say I don't think it's a huge secret now that there is a time shift in it. I think that's in enough reviews for people to pick that up. But when I wrote it, I effectively wrote it chronologically, but I knew it was never going to be chronological.
Right. Okay. Okay. A lot of editing, shifting things around afterwards.
Yeah, so I kind of wrote it chronologically to the point where things suddenly make sense. And then the second part of the book I wrote in one bit. But there were a couple of scenes in there that were very cathartic scenes that I wrote for specifically personal reasons.
Mm-hmm.
There was one particular scene that I very definitely, absolutely bears no resemblance to characters living or dead whatsoever. No.
Well, it does say in the front of all books, this
Absolutely.
it's
purely coincidental.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
any resemblance is just purely coincidental. Yeah.
Absolutely coincidental. Yes.
So with the skin, having written it so quickly and got it out in 4 months, was your intention always to self-publish it? Never, no, you didn't even look at
no,
traditional.
I mean, the skin, I wrote that first draft. I think because of the expectation of publishing, I did send it on query.
Ah, okay.
But I had already contacted an artist for the headers. I already had a cover artist in mind. I already knew what I wanted to take place. And the more I did this, the more I thought about it, and the more I talked to Crystal Matar,
Mm-hmm.
the more I suddenly realized that if I wanted this book to be the way I wanted it to be, and if I didn't want some of the scenes I'm most proud of are actually very slow paced.
Right.
And they're deliberately slow because the boat is in the Arctic and everything is slow. You read any memoirs, anything else from people searching the Northern Passage or anything like that, everything feels like it slows down.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want that to be sacrificed for the sake of pace, for commercial. And in the end, I was like, no, I can't do it. And so I pulled them. I pulled my queries.
Had you had any responses from anybody by that time?
I had a couple. I had a couple that I was still very keen on as agents that I hadn't heard back from, but I still pulled it.
Fair enough.
Because at that point I was like, no, this needs to be my book, my way. And so, yeah. And so obviously with the pack, there was never a question it was going to be anything else.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you find the whole process of self-publishing for the first time? Obviously you mentioned Crystal Matar as someone to call on, but were you tapping other people and asking them questions and just trying to absorb as much as you can about the whole thing?
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, I was very lucky because I was involved when it was more active with British and Irish writers group. So Lee Connolly, Damo, and those two were absolute rocks as I was trying to navigate, especially Lee Connolly, as I was trying to navigate self-pub and trying to get my head around what I needed to do and what order. And Crystal was utterly brilliant. She directed me to Ali, the organization, the independent authors one.
Right.
So I joined up to that, and I reckon I used their website almost daily as I was working through processes, as I was trying to work out the steps I needed to do, and how to approach it. So there was a lot of stuff, but generally I think because I've been on the fringes of the community as a reader, and because I've been looking at things and talking to people in places like Fantasy Faction for quite a long time while I was writing Gates, generally the support from the community as I was trying to work out where I was going with this was amazing. People were brilliant. Pam as well, Pam Livingston, she's absolutely amazing. But so many people helped me along the way, and because of Gates, I already had an editor in place. I've been working with the same editor since she beta read Gates of Hope. She's been kind of growing with me effectively because she's done her editing qualifications and everything else like that. So I've had the same editor all the way through. But yeah, so she didn't know the self-pub side of things for fantasy originally, but she had done stuff in other ways, and everyone was amazing, really supportive, and so many wonderful people in the community in and out of the indie side, because I had conversations with other people who are not indie pup. I had a couple of conversations with RJ Barker. He actually named the skin.
Did he?
Yes. Because I was throwing stuff at him and he chucked a load of names out, and I was like, that one, that's it.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that.
As he said, he can't pick his own book names, but he did manage to pick one of mine.
Yeah, I think he like me, most of our original titles are not the original titles. I've had one in 9 books that stuck the same title. So
he was just chucking stuff out. So I was literally trying to brainstorm, and he happened to be the person that was talking to me at the time with it. And he just, as soon as I saw it, I was like, yes, that works. It's simple. That works. So yeah, I give him credit for that one.
Don't give him too much credit though. No,
I won't give him too much credit.
Just go to his head. We don't want that. We don't want that.
No. But and then everyone at BristolCon was always really great as well. Everyone who's been involved there, I think. I say Justin has been a good friend ever since then, and answered a lot of questions for me early on. So many. Poor man.
Well, I'm going to be asking lots of questions too now, because I'm going to self-publish something later this year for the first time. So I am, embarking on this process myself. So having gone through it that first time with the skin, were you then feeling more confident about not necessarily writing the book, but self-publishing a second time with the Pact?
Yeah. I think some of the timelines caught me slightly. I think the first time through, not realizing how long it takes for Nielsen to register you as a business to give you your ISBNs. That's not somewhere that's mentioned, and that's a few weeks before you get the ISBNs. You get the ISBNs almost immediately once they've accepted. And that period was a couple of weeks wait that I hadn't considered. I knew the time scale on covers. So I knew that I knew how long it would take the artists, so Triff were the ones who did those. I knew how long it would take. I'd already got the cover for the pack before I'd finished writing it.
Right, okay.
Because I already knew at that point. I'd been climbing mountains in my car, breaking the clutch. We had to buy a second car just to get that picture in the middle, just for that lake in the middle is one of my photographs that got incorporated into it.
Right.
So yeah, I knew those sorts of timescales, whereas the first time around with the skin, I didn't have my timescale right. I was really pushing things on the cover.
Yeah.
Like to a horrific level. And I didn't realize they'd offered to do it, and I didn't really have a concept of timescale at the time. And he said he could fit it in August. And what I didn't know until afterwards was that he was doing the processing for my stuff on honeymoon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's me sending him a message.
Come on, get on
It's
with
in
it.
Eastern Europe, yeah, saying the files haven't come through, and it's like 2 days later he puts a picture up of his wedding and says how nice his honeymoon was. I'm thinking, my God, this poor
Uh-oh.
guy's wife must think I am. So yes, so much more time in the bank with the pack.
Yeah, yeah. I'm learning to plan well in advance. That's my kind of thing I've picked up
Yeah.
from other people. Everything will take longer than I think it will, so I'm putting a lot of time in ahead just in case something comes up.
I'm now at the point where I like to, I mean, those ones I pushed right up to the line. I was like, this is the date it's going to be finished. And push, 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 push.
Right.
Now with Gates of Hope, the first ARC copies went to readers in early January for an April release
Oh wow, okay.
with the cover on, with the front cover.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't have the full wrap because the last edits on the page numbers weren't done. But that gave me that long
Mm.
for a proofread, gave me that long to make sure that the final cover, and sometimes it can, I feel like, and other people might disagree with me here, but from getting your final cover uploaded to Ingram,
Yep.
from seeing those proofs in physically, potentially needing to do corrections depending on who's doing your cover,
Right.
and then getting your stock ordered without paying premium price. You need a month in hand,
Right.
comfortably.
Okay.
Comfortably a month. And if you're doing it as a tour, it needs to be more than that because they will want the books physically in their hands a month before that,
Mm.
if you're giving physicals.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those bits kind of, I mean, I did the skim with a big launch tour and everything else, and I didn't have physical copies. And I remember the tour being organized and Timmy had organized it. I'm just like this, I have no physical copies. They're not ready yet. And oh, yeah, just feeling like I'd blown it all. But now everything's done. I mean, Gates of Sorrow, my physicals arrived a couple of days ago.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't my first proofs, but they're ones I could send out and sell now.
Yeah, yeah.
My first proofs with the bar, and I always do my checks on the cover from Amazon because there's not a lot of difference between the two, and they're really quick with their proofs. And you'd have to pay to change them where you do with Ingram. There's just so many little
Steps.
bits that just, I think I've kind of got the sequence now.
Right.
That is definitely a sequence of steps. And Alex Alex S. Bradshaw, Windborne author, he's got Trollgrave coming out in May, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He was putting together a kind of checklist stroke planner for self-pub authors. So we went through it
Nice.
together, trying to get everything we could think of and the order that needed to be done for someone who was potentially a new indie author, so that they had to do this and this is the sequence that makes the fastest sense and things like that. So yeah, I remember him doing that. I don't know if he's brought it out yet, but we were certainly talking about it probably this time last year.
Mm.
I might be in the summer. It's sort of, this year's blurred a bit.
So you finished the pact, but then you've gone back and you've worked on Gates of Hope, and then obviously the sequel's coming out now. But tell me about returning to Gates of Hope, having put it down for how many years?
A couple of years, good couple of years, yeah. So I was kind of, it was both trunked and mentally trunked and done.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, when asked what I wanted for my birthday, I realized I really wanted a graphic tablet, so that because I couldn't, part of the reason that I didn't want to publish Gates of Hope initially indie was I didn't feel I had the skills to draw the maps.
Right.
And I didn't know how to draw the maps.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed maps. And I got quotes on maps. And I couldn't afford the quotes on maps. They were more than the covers.
Mm.
And I did my own maps. By the time I got to the pact, I was doing my own maps anyway.
Right.
But I was doing them with like a finger on the touchpad on the mouse. And I did the whole continent of Europe on a touchpad on the screen, with its raised flood levels. So I asked for this graphic tablet, and I think at that point I had to admit to myself that I wanted it because I really wanted to draw that map.
Ah,
And if I
okay.
wanted to draw that map, then Gates hadn't gone.
Hmm.
And so I spent the summer drawing the map before the pact was released, because the pact was released on the end of the summer holidays. I'm a teacher, so everything's in summer holidays. And so I spent the summer playing with it, and I drew that map so big I could actually project it on the side of my house. I drew it the maximum size that my software would allow me to draw. I have drawn
Right.
every frame of the window of a castle that on the actual book is less than about 2 millimeters high. I've drawn every brick in the towers. It was way more detailed than I need, but it's all measured. And yes, at that point it's kind of like, this is happening then. Okay. And I had to brace myself to reopen it. And even after working on it, obviously a couple of years prior, I mean,
Yeah.
it was better, but I still almost had to rewrite every sentence of every chapter.
So could you see, with having done the Skin and the Pact and, worked on that and coming back to it with, a few years more experience, could you see what needed work?
Yes, I think I could. And I think the other difference is I wrote The Skin and the Pact for me.
Right.
So I wrote them as pure passion projects with a very clear voice of how I wanted them to sound and how I wanted them to work. And in the process of doing that, I think I found my voice as a writer.
Interesting. Okay.
So instead of trying to be everything and all things and trying to create all of the take a trope and twist every trope very slightly. I mean, I haven't got a farm boy. I've got someone who used to be a bouncer at his parents' pub. I haven't got a little girl starting school. Magic doesn't fully manifest. They're not allowed to start training until they're in their late teens, almost in their 20s.
Mhm.
So although it's magic school, they're all that bit older.
Yeah.
They've already got some, in most cases, Surin doesn't, degrees of life experience. So I think I knew a lot more about how I wanted the prose to feel and how I wanted it to sound and how I wanted it to flow, so
Mm.
that when you read it, it was more like that. But I also still wanted to keep it at a different level. There isn't a single actual swear word in either Gates of Hope or Gates of Sorrow.
Right. By choice, you wanted that.
By choice, by choice. Everything is the Watcher or Flames, or it's in world swearing. It is not our world. It was removed completely in that respect. And while some things would completely cross over, I just chose not to. But in some respects, I've accepted it's all ages. It's not
Right.
YA. I originally was thinking it was adult. I've accepted it crosses bridges. I've had a student I teach come up to me who's in year 7 who read it and loved it.
Mhm.
But it is not aimed at kids. They go to pubs. There is other things like that, but it is safe for a kid to read, if
Is
that
that,
makes sense.
yeah. Do you think that's a callback to some of the stuff you read growing up? Like that?
Possibly. I mean, I've done a bit of canvassing this week because obviously I'm trying to promote and things, and said, well, how would you describe it? And the general feeling I'm getting is that Robin Hobb, but with less torture to your characters, crossed with
True.
the space dragons and the concept of Pern.
Right. Yeah. I'm a McCaffrey. Hmm.
So when you
Okay.
kind of put those bits together, it's definitely more a love letter to classic fantasy with a bit of a twist and a bit of a me thrown in. I mean, the bad guys are insects, and there are moons and planets and lunar gates and portals, and it's got all of that going on. But
Mm.
it's also got telepathic hounds and magic and plants and singing, and it's packed. It's got way too much in it. It's got everything in it.
So did it take you a long time to world build it in, or even when you came back to
Yeah.
it, were
I think the
you
world building was
refining
what took
refining
so
it?
long. Um, in some respects, the world's not even fully built.
Right.
caldera is, which is the main continent of Luce, which is the world.
Mhm.
So the world has got 2 orbiting moons. I have spent lots of time discussing with a physics teaching colleague about the logistics of this, because one of the moons, I suppose, is a little inspired by mist.
Mhm.
It has an ever dark and an ever light side.
Right.
So that's the middle moon, and then there is a further moon. And the further moon is where these insectoid critters are the native inhabitants as such.
Mhm.
So the world that had the most effort put into it initially is where 2 of the points of view is, which is the main world, Luce, which has got the world filled with craters. The land is sunken. It's post-war,
Mhm.
and the war broke the land.
Mm.
And the entire continent is pockmarked, so all the towns are in the craters. So the only way to travel from place to place is to get out of the craters,
Interesting.
and traveling through holloways because the surface is now dangerous.
Mhm.
So the building of that took a while, and the creatures that then have to inhabit it. So if you're going to build a world like that, what are the creatures going to be like? What are they going to eat? Where have they come from? If you've got portals, you're going to have a leaking.
Mhm.
So you're going to have some degree of invasive species and their impact on the world and society, and they're obviously going to be more populated around the area closest to that gate.
Mm.
And I decided if I was going to do this, and then each of the worlds needed to have its own endemic species. So then I have 3 different places that need their own endemic species, and certain numbers of which have to leak in each direction. And so which ones had gone which way, and the difference in conditions in the different places. And yeah, it got quite, the world building definitely is what made the whole project slower.
So the love of science suddenly seems to filter into the book and make it all structure and all work again, because it has
Oh,
to.
I have done the main function for the gates is that it's, although it's never explicitly written, the
Mm.
magic is a genetic mutation. And it's a genetic mutation because the magic works a bit like radiation in the sense that it has altered the DNA of those closest to the gates. So how that has been inherited, the fact that it's on the X chromosome,
Right.
which means that we have male and females with different powers and different
Mhm.
levels of power,
Mhm.
which means the women are stronger in this world. So they are the stronger ones, naturally. So there's all sorts of stuff linked to that and linked features. So they have purple hair. It's a linked feature. They happen to have purple hair. If they are magical, they stand out. Nobody can hide it.
Right. Okay.
So you've got all that kind of stuff. And then it's like, well, I'm saying this, but they are hiding it because they've developed a culture where they wear scarves to hide their hair. They make it a fashion item. Therefore, nobody sees if you've got purple hair or not.
So it's concealing magic in a world that are people
Concealing
comfortable with it? Are they not comfortable, or is that why they're hiding?
the people with the magic have chosen at the start of this book, having broken the world to pieces, they've allowed that to fall almost a fairy tale. And they have
Right.
continued, but they have become administrators. They are the ones who record the births and the deaths, because how else would you take those children as soon as they appear? How
Clever.
else would you track the bloodlines of those who might accidentally throw up a magical child that needs to be swooped off quickly? So they're there in plain sight as healers, as those who seem to be particularly good at healing, as particularly good at singing, who make you feel better after they've performed. All these little things that just playing a little bit on the edge of it, but never overtly.
Hmm. So having come back and rewritten Gapes of Hope after, a few years and worked on it,
Mm-hmm.
was it always going to be part of a series when you originally conceived
Yeah.
of it, or was it just be like you just did it and then you'll see where it
No, it
happens?
was always going to be a trilogy, and it still will be.
Right.
Um, I had already written the I suppose it's probably potentially the climax scene of book 3 before I started Gates of Sorrow.
Oh wow, okay, right, yes, you know where you're working towards.
I know exactly what I'm working towards. I don't know necessarily how they'll get there at this point, 100% of the way, but I know that scene I'm working towards.
Yeah.
Um, so it was always going to be a trilogy, and to some extent, I think each of the books was always going to have a slightly more focused arc. Although there's 3 points of view, the first one, Darren, very much is finding his feet. Not that the other two aren't doing anything, but they're in a different part of their own journey.
Right.
And the second book, Alyssa, is the one who really starts to stand proud. And that might make it sound like I've been very mean to the last character, but she has a much longer personal journey to take before she's ready to stand up and go, okay, it's my time.
Fair enough.
So yeah, she had a long way to go. um and she's the one that I think people like the least, and that's fine. I don't like her sometimes. I don't like her quite often when she says things. You're writing it down, it just kind of comes out, and I'm like, yeah, you would say that. I don't like it, but you would say that.
Well, it's being true to the character. You don't have to
Yeah.
necessarily like them. It's just
No, I don't necessarily
you
like her all the time. There's a lot about her I do like. There's a lot about her I want to slap.
know.
Um, but yes, I think my big worry initially was that Darren was the one with the least agency, and yet he's the one that people have liked the most.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
In book 1, I felt he had the least agency, but or the least that happened to him. More that it happened to him than that he happened it. He made it happen. You know the
Yeah.
word. You
Yeah.
know the phrase I'm going for.
Yeah. He was the architect, I suppose, as being carried along by events.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but because he has Star, because he has the dog,
hmm Everyone loves dogs. And you can do whatever you
everyone
want
loves
to
dogs.
people in any story, any book, any film, any TV show. You can kill as many people as you want. But you can't kill the cat or the dog. And if you do,
No, I know.
people are
You
just
you
like,
you
there's
demonize. That's it
unforgivable.
forever.
Yeah, basically.
I know.
It's
I
like
know.
that website, Does the Dog Die? You know.
I know. I keep wondering whether mine's actually made it onto there yet or not. It hasn't yet.
Does the doctor? Yeah,
I do have messages from people saying I really want to read this, but does the dog
but
die?
but
So I always have that conversation in DMs. I won't say it publicly because some people don't like to know either way.
well, yeah, because some people, yeah, spoilers and stuff, and some people are okay with
Mhm.
knowing certain things. This is true.
Yes.
This is true.
So I always, if someone addresses that, I always reply privately.
Mhm.
But
So
as you say, if you killed the dog, you kind of your career's over.
yeah, you're person non gratis at that point. You may as well just go and work in a car wash or something, you know. Um, so having it took you quite the journey to finish Gates of Hope. When you came to write
Yeah.
Gates of Sorrow, was it easier?
Oh, it's different because the first 27,000 words of that was written whilst I was querying the first round of Gates of Hope.
Right, okay.
So it was rough.
Hmm.
It was really rough to the point where beta readers who read it went, oh, beta readers. They said it felt like two different people's writing.
Right, yeah, I guess that time difference between them when you first wrote it and then
So it took
coming
a
back.
lot of effort to match the beginning to the end,
Yeah.
to match that in and to smooth that over. Um, but some of my favorite scenes are really early on. Some of them are within that bit. Certainly one of my favorite scenes of Alyssa is in that early section. I've been really grateful that none of the early readers have spoilt that for people either. I've noticed a number of reviews saying I'm not going to discuss Alyssa.
Okay, yeah,
And it's
yeah. You
like
don't want people to
that's
spoil things.
that's but some of my favorite scenes are hers
Okay.
and they were written early. But once in this respect with this book, once this character, this big fella here,
Mm-hmm.
showed up, once this fella showed up, the one thing I will say, this is Eeyore in dragon form.
Okay.
Once this character showed up, that storyline was off.
Right, okay.
It was off under at speed. Um, And it's fine so that she's the only one with hair that short. It's fine. It's clearly her. um, so that one was much easier. It was harder in some respects to deal with the other two points of view, because when in Gates of Hope they'd all been going their own way.
Mm.
And in Gates of Sorrow, two of them were doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And they were interacting with the same characters.
Right.
So everything had to then make sure it was pieced in the right order, because effectively they are solving a whole sequence of events before they can get on with doing other things they need to do. So that puzzle solving and that steps that they have to do within the same environment without standing on each other's toes or crossing over was quite challenging to then keep the flow and to have that switching of points of view fluidly without you feeling like you've given that one that bit of the story and you've given that one that bit of the story, and trying to keep them flowing along their own route even though they were crossing over with the same people.
Were you worried about the pace then, just feeling too slow?
I was a little, but I think with this series I am accepting that this is an adventure, not an action book.
Right. Yeah.
It's fine. Book 3 will be faster. There's a lot to happen in it, and I refuse to make it get longer than Gates of Hope. So it will have to be faster. But I think for this, the world building and the characters and the interactions are the story.
Mm-hmm.
The characters are the story. It's very much following those three individuals rather than a grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes when things are more intimate, they do potentially remain slower, because if it went at a breakneck speed at that level of intimacy, I think it'd be exhausting. For the character, it would be unfeasible, potentially. There is a point where they have to slow down. Otherwise, you read a book like that's going too fast, you're like, but it's like they need a long rest. They need to camp, they need a long rest, but I have accepted with this one it's going to be slower. I'm working on other things that are a lot faster paced, much closer to the pack. The pack's the fastest paced of my books. But this series is what it is. It's almost a tribute to, as you say, throwback, but with a bit more modern twist, with portals, with insects, with weird stuff. Some people have said it's almost got hints of sci-fi in it. So
right. Okay.
But I think that's possibly because the dragons fly through space at points. There's stuff.
So have you heard from very young readers and older readers?
The youngest reader is the student who accidentally came across me while her dad was scouring Amazon and went, "Isn't that your biology teacher?"
Yep.
Who then came into school and said, "Are you
Yes.
actually an author?" And then she looked at my lanyard, and I have my covers on the little disc badges on my lanyard at school. And she went, "Can I read them?" And I said, "You can't read the skin and you can't read the pact."
Ew.
I said, "But you can read the one with the dog on." And she'd stopped me as she passed, as she was reading the way through it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, she apparently really enjoyed it. So from 12-year-old really enjoyed it. But she was reading, you see books on tables and kids have finished work.
Yep.
And I could see what was on the tables. And it wasn't the romance. It was the kind of thing. I was sitting there looking at it thinking, I'm going to come up and are also boughts at some point.
Mm-hmm.
You get that kind of, I can see what she's got there, and it's going to show up at some point.
Yeah.
So it was within her wheelhouse anyway. I think most other people who've read it have been older. A few people have said it's YA, but one of the characters is late 30s, one is mid-20s.
Well,
but it's because they almost have a coming of age. They're all coming out of a different place and going to a new place. So I can see where that comes from. And the no swearing in it. I'm not saying there's no violence in it.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I think back to some of the films that I watched when I was a kid, some of the classics, some of the Spielbergs and some of the other ones, and that they're described as, family films, like things like The Goonies, but there's some really scary moments in that. There's some
Yeah,
terrifying bits in the in the first Ghostbusters films, some very adult content on reflection, but when you watch it as
yeah.
a kid, you
Don't,
just
yeah.
like, you don't get the whole picture. So,
No, there's hidden things and double meanings and stuff like that, exactly, that would go potentially just straight over as
mhm.
wordplay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But
So, but I say it wasn't written for children, but it's safe for children. And that's
okay.
okay.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
I'm happy to wear that badge with this particular series. It'll be the only one like it that I write. Everything else will go clearly won't be, but at least there'll be one series that will be. One that my son can read before he's older.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, it's having something that someone can pick up. I had a mother approach me once and said, "Could a 13-year-old son read one of my books?" And I was like, "No." She's like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Okay, you read it and then tell me." And she emailed me and said, "Yeah, thank you. You can't read it yet." I'm like, I told you.
My sister-in-law bought a copy, bless her. And then said, "Is it okay for Bailey to read, for my nephew to read it?" And I said, "Well, have you read it yet? They suggest that you or my brother read it first,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah,
you can decide if you think he can handle it."
yeah. This is it. Always get someone you trust to read it first before.
Hmm.
That's a danger.
Yes, it's not too much, but what is there is not subtle. Yeah,
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, Gates of Sorrow comes out on the
it
19th of
comes out
April
on the 19th. Yes,
this year, within
and
like a
it's
few
so
days of this
pretty.
being out, like a couple of days after this interview is out. There you go. Look at that. It's out. I know you're working on the third book
I am
now.
working on something slightly different just because I usually write a short story, but I am finishing a novella
Hmm.
because I can't possibly do folklore fantasy and then a tribute to epic fantasy and then do something along the same lines. So I'm writing a cozy, humorous novella,
Okay. Sure.
which is called Unfamiliared, which I'm nearly done with, which is about a bunch of witches who lose their familiars, which are their access to their powers, basically, by foul play before the annual inter-village games, and how they have to overcome that and fake their way through because they are the hosts, whilst trying to recover their familiars in the background.
Okay.
So that one, the plan for that is for it to be out by Worldcon.
Oh wow. Okay. Oof.
So that is the plan, to have that one with me when I go there because it's small and it'll fit in my suitcase.
Mhm.
Um, I've got something slightly different that is another bit of a moment like the skin, that
Mhm.
something is screaming at me to write it,
Right.
which is about 24,000 words through at the moment.
Oh.
Um, and I suspect that's going to come out as a similar speed. Once Unfamiliar is done, I suspect that's just this one that's sitting like screaming at the back of my head. I've been drawing chapter headers for it again.
Oh wow. Okay. We're ready.
So
We're ready.
they're kind of, yeah, the chapter headers were essential because they're part of the world building and I needed to know what they look like because, yeah, anyway, so that one I will probably finish. I might even throw that at some small presses.
Oh, okay.
And then whilst that does whatever it does, I'm going to then go and have the time and the headspace to really focus on tying everything together for the last book of this trilogy
Mm.
and make sure. The other thing is this book that's screaming at me is a faster pace. So I think the trilogy will benefit from me having worked at a faster pace to then
Mhm.
bring everything together at the end. It's definitely percolating. There's lots of, I'm kind of making a cup of tea and I'm thinking, oh, now what can they do there? So that Watcher's Gates is definitely percolating. It's doing its thing at the back of my mind at the moment.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, there's definitely things starting, there's notes starting to be made for little bits or scenes that need to be light bulbed through it. So once it starts, hopefully it won't take too long, because I just need time to brew on it, I think, and give it a really good, really, really good ending.
Yeah, tying up a trilogy, wrapping everything up in a satisfying
Yeah.
manner. Yeah.
And because this has been going for so long, I want that last one to be absolutely. But yeah, I won't. The little other thing, it's not going to be massive, but so Unfamiliar is the next one that
Yep.
will be out this summer, and then the other one is going under the working title of Swarm Rest
Right.
at the
Okay.
moment. That one will not, even if I do decide to India, it will not come out until I have finished The Watcher's Gates. This trilogy will be published before
Yeah.
I go back and put that out, regardless. If it has to sit on the shelf while I finish up Gates, it will. I just need to write it whilst it's in my head and screaming at me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's your own deadlines. That's the other benefit of indie. You know, you can go and do something else and come back and then carry on.
Yeah.
It's not the same kind of, it must be out on this year, on this time sort of thing. So
I set my own deadlines quite tightly. I like 10 months, but I haven't managed to make it. This time I'm a week over a year
okay.
on the second book.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been lots of things that have happened over the last 12 months that slowed stuff down. So
Yeah.
that's fine. Lots of personal stuff that's just meant that it hasn't gone at speed I would have liked it to.
Mm. Well, it it is now going to be out in a few days. So
It is. And I'll be pleased to have it out there. And there is so much I'm excited about in this. I cannot wait for people to meet the Chavas. I can't wait for them to meet the dude on the cover. And yeah, all the Mythies, all the inhabitants of that middle moon that we got barely a hint in full force. I cannot wait for that. I think that's going to
fantastic.
be. I'm looking forward to it. So seeing people's reactions. I really want. It's like names. I want to say. I want people to meet. And
Yeah. Don't no
I know
spoilers.
I'm not going
No
to.
spoilers. No spoilers.
No
Right.
spoilers. It will really
So
spoil the fun.
I'll put links down below where people can find you and find the books. And of course, you and I are both going to be at Worldcon in Glasgow
Yeah,
in August, only a few months away now. It's scary because it's
scary.
April already. But
No.
oh God, yes, we'll be there. We'll be there. Well, thank you for coming on tonight, and thank you for telling me and everyone watching your journey to this point in publication. And watch out for things in the future. As you said, you've got more projects cooking in the
More projects
background.
I have time to write.
Yeah, this is it. This is it. This is usually the way. Usually the way. But anyway, thanks for joining me tonight, and we'll say goodnight to
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.